name we pray.
Amen.
I was wondering why you looked up. I was like, what did she look up for?
See, your eyes are open.
I'm
Okay.
deaf. I have to have my eyes open. Remember, Lori?
Oh, okay. Okay, Dreamy. We need somebody with ASL in here. Okay, I'm so excited that you guys are here. Morgan's here, and check in with me because I think we're going to talk a little bit more than we just like read through. More. That's okay. We'll forgive Morgan this one time. I think we're going to talk a bit because I think something that was frustrating to me the last couple years of evangelism and discipleship is how many go back out, how so many can hear the word of truth, not from me, not from you, but just hear it, just like whatever Christian is offering it, and they can hear that, and then they can go back to their old life. Like, what did their old life give them? They desired it. It was so painful that they desired a new life, and then they get the new life, and they see the power of God and answering prayer and fellowship and church unity and service and purpose, and then they go back to this empty life that they had. And so, anyway, it's here in John, and it's terrifying, but we've seen it a lot. We've seen people give up Christ for psychology, for Torah observance, go back under the law, for false doctrine, oneness, for, I mean, pick your thing. There's probably been some Mormons and Jehovah Witnesses in here, who knows? But you just see it. Like, look at all this beautiful fellowship and all these testimonies, these broken lives that we had before Christ. And then people will give up this abundant life and purpose and go back to their dog vomit. So anyway, it's here in John. At first it took me to healing because we're going to go John 4:46 through, I thought we were going to get through 5. We're not going to get through 5. So John 4:46 through 54 is Jesus healing the royal official's son. And then John 5:1 through, I think 17 is Jesus healing the tormented man in Bethesda. 38 years this man suffered his infliction on his body. 38 years he had this life outside of healing, and then he gets healing, and then he goes back to his old life. And it's just like, that's where I sat this last couple days with this. So I wanted to, let's just read through it. It kind of poked me in the eye that signs and wonders and let me see, signs, wonders, and miracles. Signs, miracles, and wonders, wonder, signs, and miracles, and like all kinds of variations of this kept popping up. And so that kind of stood out to me. But I think we're going to go back into the healing and back into how demonic false religion really is, like the clutches and the temple that surrounds somebody with a false religion. So anyway, if somebody wants to read John 4:46 through 54 for us. That would be awesome. My voice kind of gives out halfway through this if I read it all. But I can. That's okay, you guys. Okay. Then he came again to Cana of Galilee. So remember, he was with the Samaritans. He went out of his way for the Samaritan woman. All the in-depth detail we saw there with the Samaritan woman, how the care that he gave to her, calling her to saving faith. And so he was in Samaria, the best that we know. Then he came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water into wine. And there the royal official whose son is sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and was asking him to come down and heal his son, for he was about to die. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will never believe." I've often read that with like, "Unless you guys see signs and wonders." That's not how Jesus is talking right here. He's actually talking with, like, he's giving the option, just like he did with the Samaritan woman, to really profess her faith. It wasn't, cosmetic answer that this man had. So he says, so the royal official said to him, "Sir, come down, for my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son lives." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started on his way. And while he was still going down, his slaves met him, saying to the son that the son was alive. So he inquired of them the hour when he began to get better. Then they said to him, "Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him." So the father knew it was the hour at which Jesus had told him, "Your son lives." And he and he himself believed, and his whole household. This again is the second sign that Jesus did when he came out of Judea into Galilee. So it's you're going to map 7 signs in the book of John. He's only going to mention the first 2, and he's going to keep this. He planted this in your mind to have you mapping and counting, but he's only going to mention 1 and 2, and then you're going to count 3 through 7. So this is the second sign. The first one also happened in Cana of Galilee. He answered, "This is the first sign, water into wine." This is the beginning of his ministry. So that's a passage right there. That's the chunk of 4, right? It says, after these things, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. That's John 5:1. We think that this is way more into his ministry. These things are not days apart from each other. We think that I say a lot of the commentary I read was like, it's pushing you into the midpoint of his ministry. We think that because the beginning of his ministry was to the Jews, right? He was to the house of Israel first. He went to Israel. He went to the feast. He was in Jerusalem declaring that he was Messiah, doing all the works, being accused, being attacked, and then providing, probably the Sermon on the Mount with, the new kingdom, the kingdom of God is at hand. And then because he went to the Samaritan, he went outside the Jews. He's taking this message to the Gentiles now. That's probably halfway through his ministry. So when he's healing the royal official's son, it's probably the halfway mark through his ministry. So I'm just going to read right into 5. There's so much here. If you guys take any one of these sentences, you're just going to have hours of study. But things poke out to me, like the directionality of where he was traveling and was he going up and stuff. And it's really cool because the royal official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." And if you just look at a map, Capernaum is lower than Galilee. Yeah, Galilee is lower than Capernaum, and he's saying, "Come down," like he's saying, no, but switch that. I'm sorry, I'm mumbling through this. But he's talking about actual topography, the actual layout of the roading and stuff. So then it'll say like he came up, and remember we talked about the Samaritans were fine if you were going away from Jerusalem, but when you were going towards Jerusalem, that's when you had a problem of stuff. So there's really interesting things here, and I did grab a couple of them, but I think we're going to skip a lot of this and just go into 5 because this Bethesda thing is like really intense. Yeah, unless you people see signs and wonders, there's a ton of scriptures on that. So maybe we'll cycle back to that. You can see the whole picture of they're kind of using signs, wonders and signs, miracles, wonders and signs, wonders, signs and miracles, kind of interchangeably, and they are the same foundational Greek word. So I was thinking, well, he keeps making a difference of like this is the second sign and not calling them miracles, but I think it's just John's vocabulary, and he's not really saying like this is different than a miracle. They do have a little bit different definitions. And actually, let's do that before we go into 3 or 5. I'm sorry. So signs, wonders, and miracles is Strong's number. It starts off in Strong's number 4591, semaino, and that's from sema, and it's to indicate. So that's what a sign is. It's to indicate. Miracles is Strong's number 4592, just one definition later. It's semalon. It's the base of the word we just had for signs. It's miracles, signs, tokens, and wonders. It's an indication, especially, certainly, or to the supernatural. So it is talking about things that like only God can do. These things are not normally, they can't be just explained away with, the wind shifted or temperature or whatever. So miracles, we see miracles. He lists the miracles, John 2:11, 2:23. That was the water to wine. We saw the miracle in 3:2. When Nicodemus is saying, "Rabbi, we know that you have come from God as a teacher, for no one who can do these signs that you do unless God is with him." Then in 6:2, we haven't gotten there yet, but 6:2 is, now a large crowd is following him because they were seeing the signs that he was doing of those who were sick. So this is, I think it's kind of important that this is in the middle of his ministry, because they've seen him cleanse the temple. They've seen a year and a half worth of signs, wonders, and miracles. And just in a couple chapters later, which probably amounts to a couple months later, they're going to start planning to kill him because he's claimed to be God. And this, in this Bethesda situation, this is when they really start hating him. And so we're going to see, it's because he healed on the Sabbath. Not because he healed, like, oh, this man hasn't walked in 38 years. They don't care for that. Because it was on the Sabbath, their holy day. And like, look how much false doctrine still cycles around on the Sabbath. That's what you have with Jehovah Witness. That's what you have with Seventh-day Adventism, Mormonism, Judaism, like Islam, all this like Friday, Saturday fighting over, you guys aren't Christians because you're worshiping on the Sunday. That's for the sun god Ra and all this. And it's like, it's the same thing that Jesus met with back here. So anyway, the miracles are mentioned all throughout John. Miracles is mentioned first. The first time it's mentioned is in Numbers 14:22. It goes into Deuteronomy and Judges, the supernatural, regenerate, and religious, ethereal. Like that's what you would think of with a miracle or a sign. Wonders is kind of the same thing. It's saras, the prodigy or omen, a wonder. So they're all just right around, I'm sorry, Strong's number 5059 for wonders. So it's a little bit different definition for wonders, but basically still the same. There's not really a big definitional difference between them all. So I thought there would be, there wasn't, unless you guys see signs and wonders. 48. I've got a ton of stuff from back in Daniel, Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, 2nd Thessalonians, and Hebrews. I'll send the notes through to the chat so you guys can look all that up by yourself. But I think we need to get into the Bethesda thing because Bethesda is pretty interesting. So I'm just going to read it. After these things, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. We don't know which feast this is. We don't know if this is Tabernacles, if this is booths of what's the I'm spacing. Well, we don't know which one this is, but it is one of the 4 that requires all the men to go to it. Now there was in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porticos. In these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered, waiting for the moving of the waters. You'll notice there that the moving of the waters has a parenthesis around it. So from right here to the end of I'll tell you when the parenthesis stops, which is the end of verse 4. This is in some early transcripts and not in others. So this might have been kind of a clarity to what they thought was going on. So some scribes put it in, but there wasn't a definitive answer. So some scribes didn't put it in. So this is not a clerical, this isn't like a corrupt in the transcripts. It's just that some scribes were trying to identify what was making this water move while others just left it like, if God doesn't explain it, we're not going to add it in. So anyway, you'll notice that the definition of why these waters moving is not in some of the manuscripts. So anyway, I'll go back and read verse 2. Now they're in Jerusalem by this sheep gate, a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porticos. In these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered. So here we start. Waiting for the moving of the waters, for an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after stirring of the waters, stepped in was made well from the water's sickness, from which that he was afflicted. End of parentheses. That statement is in some manuscripts and not in others. And there's a really good reason why. One of the reasons is what I just said, but there's other things too. So verse 5, and a man was there who was sick for 38 years. He's not 38 years old. He's been sick for 38 years on top of whatever lifespan he is. We don't know how old he is. When Jesus saw him laying there and knew that he was already been sick a long time, he said to him, "Do you wish to get well?" I think that's really important, right? Because when we see somebody sick, hurt, maimed, car accident, whatever, disfiguring or malady or some kind of, born with, ADHD, anxiety, whatever it is. It's an odd question to say, do you wish to get well, right? like we can assume that they wish to get well, but he's talking to his spirit too. He's talking to the spiritual right here too. Do you wish to get well? The sick man answered, Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me. So that is in all the manuscripts, all the earlier manuscripts. So back to verse 2 through 4, the scribe is trying to tell you why they're thinking that there's some stirring in the water here. And they're giving it this reason that some messenger, it could be messenger, angel, priest, comes into the water and stirs it, and the first one in is healed. Jesus said to him, Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. There's 3 commandments to this man. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And immediately the man became well and picked up his mat and began to walk. Now it was the Sabbath on that day. That's like its own sentence. It's like, because that's the whole point why everybody gets mad. So the Jews were saying to the man who had been healed, It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to carry your mat. So these are the same people that had not helped him into the pool to get healing for 38 years. Asked if he wasn't a force like salvation. Yeah. Lawful. So right away they're chewing him out for picking up his mat. Like, but you guys could have gotten him in the pool all those 38 years. But he answered and said to him, but he answered them, He who made me well was the one who said, Pick up your mat and walk. They asked him, Who is this man who said this to you? Pick up your mat and walk. But the man who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had slipped away while there was a crowd in that place. Afterwards, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, Behold, you have become well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you. The man went away and disclosed to the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Right away, narcs him out. None of them helped him do anything, and he runs to them. It's just like this religious indoctrination, this false religion, how it's like cancerous. And for this reason, the Jews were persecuting Jesus because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But he answered them, My Father is working until now, and I myself am working. He is clearly stating that he is God. So this is where they start to kill him. So I wanted to go back to a little bit of this. The Bethesda thing is really interesting because that's why I kind of paused throughout this. Bethesda by itself means, I think, house of mercy. Bethesda means house of mercy in the Hebrew tongue. So we know that this is current Hebrew to that time. It wasn't put in later. It wasn't like a clerical error in that this is what was surrounding. They thought there was healing here. The spot is pointed out traditionally as Birket Israel, near the fort of Antonia, but since Dr. Robertson rejected of this, it has been generally abandoned. He himself adopted the Fountain of the Virgin. I think that's what it's actually called right now, is the Fountain of the Virgin, but in the Hebrew tongue, it was known as the House of Mercy. He saw the water. So this doctor goes in. They're trying to figure out like the layout of Jerusalem. This is, I think, 30 years ago. And he himself watched the water rise in this area a foot in 5 minutes. So it's got this spring that feeds this well, which is why they thought healing was there, because they're getting all this fresh water and it's stirring it up. The fountain is connected with the pool of Siloam, and probably the fountain's under the Grand Mosque. So if you look up the Grand Mosque on Google, you're going to see all this, like the waterway to this thing. The 7th edition of Aldart's commentary contains an interesting letter pointing out that Siloam itself was probably the pool of Bethesda, and that the remains of the 4 columns at the east wall of the pool with 4 others on the center show that there was a structure half covering it, which resting upon 4 columns would give 5 spaces or porches. The fact that this pool is called Siloam in John 9:7 does not oppose this view. So it's like the same area. We're going to see this area again because Pilate is going to this is where Pilate's going to be with Jesus. Is the same place that he healed this man. This is where Pilate brings him out in this, it's a huge area. You can Google all this stuff so you can actually look up the pool of Siloam or House of Mercy or Fountain of the Virgin. The word called here is more exactly surnamed the House of Mercy, may well have been given to the structure, and thus extended the pool in addition to its own name. So the pool and the patios and stuff might have different names. So that's why it's like, well, where are they here and there? But they're kind of all in the same geographical area. And it's interesting because of the added text here is like what was going on here. So a couple of these commentators get through to saying it. Many men learned, understand by it, a bath like those near Jericho, where Aristobulus was drowned by Herod's orders as he was swimming, called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda. There's a lot of history around the naming of this stuff. The House of Mercy having 5 porticos, piazzas or covered walks being the most agreeable or solitary building in those warm climates, with excessive heat was not only troublesome but prejudicial to health. Probably the basin had 5 sides. In these lay a great multitude of important folk, the water being highly esteemed on account of some medicinal virtues which attended it, and benefit many had received by bathing in it. So it was like maybe a rumor at the time that if you got there first, you were healed. One of the commentaries was talking about they might have washed the animals here after the sacrifice, because, right, this is the temple, it's for the sacrifice. They might have slaughtered the animals, come to here, washed the animals, taken the animals to sacrifice, like we see in Deuteronomy. But that doesn't really explain why it's only the first person that gets healing and not the subsequent people that try and jump in the water, when it starts stirring. We don't know for this stirring, but what it actually points to is false religion. That maybe because the word is an angel, right? It says an angel comes and stirs the water. Well, angel in the Greek is a messenger. So it could have been one of the priests because they esteem these guys so much, like God's like, right? He gets healed from Jesus and goes back to false religion to narc out Jesus. And so it might have just been one of the priests from the temple stirring this thing and kind of like the Benny Hinn's and the Kenneth Copelands, I'm going to push coronavirus out of you. And, he has some kind of kind of influence over people's understanding of what's going on. But this person has not been healed for 38 years, and his religious system did nothing to care for that. So anyway, there's huge history around this. Dr. Hammond conjectures that not an angel of God, but an officer sent by the priests and rulers at a certain time to stir up the waters of this pool is here intended, and that the warm entrails of the animals which he supposed were cast into the wash communicated its healing virtue. But surely all the circumstances of this history justly observes render this hypothesis highly improbable, for how is it that the first would be healed and not subsequent? That it should only cure the first person that stepped in, though he might be followed by others in the same instant. For how should the natural virtue of this pool, impregnated by the warm entrails of so many sacrifices, extend itself only to one? So that was their point. They were like having problems with why this line is added. Was there actual healing going on here? If there was true healing, Josephus doesn't talk about it. He doesn't talk about this pool or the stirring or the healing. So this man's been here for 38 years. And he says he's been here for the water, for the healing. But then you have people immediately at the time of Christ and right after, they never mention this pool. So it might have been like religious, superstition. I'm getting ahead of myself. And this might be one of the reasons why Jewish writers are so silent as to its virtue, because I'm sorry. I'm jumping around you guys tonight. Flu kids really threw me for a loop this morning. Lastly, the very foundation of this conjecture is taken away by the observation of Dr. Lightfoot, that there was a lever in the temple for the washing of those animals, so that they were not likely being washed in this pool. It is further to be observed that the waters of Siloam were a type of kingdom of David, according to Isaiah 8:6, and of Christ, according to John 12:3, of the same prophet. When Siloam is interpreted, sent by this evangelist in 9:7 to this type of Messiah, God might therefore give this virtue about this time. So they're saying that maybe there was swirling in the water And it was getting people ready for their Messiah to come. Because remember, up until Christ, God had been quiet for about 400 years prior to this, without prophets, without messages and stuff. So it might have been a real thing going on. He might communicate this virtue to this pool as a prefiguration of the virtue of this pool that then ceased when they were persisting in their infidelity, rejecting our Savior. And this might be one of the reasons why the Jewish writers are so silent as to its virtue, because of its significance. It related to Christ, and by this miracle confirmed his doctrine. So maybe that's why the Josephus is silent on it, because he did not believe in Jesus Christ. He affirmed Christ was a real person at that time. He affirmed a lot of history around it. But if he would have mentioned this pooling, it would have actually confirmed that Jesus Christ, because it stopped. It stopped when Christ got there to heal this man. So the pool itself is mentioned in Nehemiah 3. So it's a real place. It's got importance, but it's just the stirring that we don't know about. So Nehemiah 3:1. Then Eliashib, the high priest, arose with his brothers, the priests, and built the sheep gate. They set it apart as holy and made its doors stand. And they set apart as holy the wall to the tower of the 100 and the tower of the Hananel. So this is when Nehemiah and Israel is in captivity, and Nehemiah is actually, he works for the king Artaxerxes, and he goes to Artaxerxes. I think he's a he hands the wine to the king, and his face is sullen, and the king's like, why do you look so down? And he says, if it be your request, can I go, my homeland where my God is, it lays in ruins, I'd like to fix it. And then he asks for all these things, and Artaxerxes says, go be it. So he goes and builds this sheep gate. So this is where the sheep come in for slaughter, for the holy sacrifice. And then there's this pool next to it, and then all the porticos. So you can imagine how busy this place is too, what's going on here, and who the witnesses are to this. And then later in Nehemiah 3:32, between the upper room of the corner and the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and the merchants made repairs. So that was like the history of what's going on right there. Merchants made repairs. That's neat. And then Nehemiah 12:39. Who did we lose? Emily and her sister, huh? Okay.
Tanya will be here soon. She's on a work call.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Nehemiah 12:39. And above the gate of Ephraim, and by the old gate, and by the fish gate, the tower of Hananel, and the tower of 100, as far as the sheep gate, and they stood at the gate of the guard. So this is actually they're singing praise to God, and it's like it's telling you the extension of the land of Dreamy says, I'm still here. Girl, your mama watches animals die. Anyway, so the history of so the history of the sheep gate is pretty cool. That all definitely existed. The stirring we don't know about, so you can kind of read through commentary on that. So I'll get off of that. But says 6 to 7. Yeah, a couple of them were saying, well, maybe it's because this is the time of Christ, pointing to Christ. In the times of Sandys, this is in 1611 AD, the spring was found running, but in small quantities. In the time of Mundrell, that's 1697, just 86 years later, the stream did not run. So there's a missionary, like a missionary in around the 4th century that goes, and this area is still standing and still filled with water. And then 1611 trickling in, and then by the late 1600s it's all dried up. So if you go now, I think you can actually see to the bottom of this now. But there's a picture that goes around online, and it's like these deep like stoned pools. That's not it. That's not the one. That's a big old fat lie. Because if you think about, well, they just know where it is. That's a big old fat lie. But if you think about this person is paralyzed in some way. He's got neurosis or his nerves are bad or he's broken, whatever. He's not going to get into a 15-foot pool and be able to get out. They would just be a bunch of bodies at the bottom of this thing. So it's something that's like, it's a small, shallow pool for some kind of cleaning, swimming. We're not sure. We read in the scriptures in the sheep gate in Jerusalem, Nehemiah 3:1, we just read, there's also a market for sheep and other cattle. This is Deuteronomy 14:26. Some therefore add markets, others add gate to the word. Anyway, it goes into all this in-depth history. I'll get off of that. Mentioned the waters of Shiloh are mentioned there in Isaiah 8:6. I'll send you guys the notes to this. I think that the biggest thing here is that he goes back into false religion, having met the king, having met the Messiah. He runs to false religion faster than anything, and you see it all the time. It's like the sower seeds. Some spring up, they hear the gospel and it's good, and they spring up, and then the cares of the world drag them away. They give up eternal life for nothing, for their cares, their afflictions, back into slavery. So the whole thing about this is the Sabbath day. That's why he gets in trouble, and they start desiring to kill him because he's healed on the Sabbath. So man, what the blind leading the blind right here. And let's just open it up and chat now. Because how you can be around, and Christ had healed. I mean, in Jerusalem at this time, everybody was healed of demons, of sickness, of everything. But specifically to this passage, Jesus tells him, go and sin no more. So this problem with his body, what do they call it? He was there 38 years, sick. So he has some kind of sickness, 38 years, directly relating to sin. There's other times in scripture, it's like when the blind, it's not relating to sin. Jesus says, his disciples say, who sinned, him or his parents? And Jesus says, none. This is so God can be glorified. So this gentleman is directly relating to sin, and then he runs right back into sin. He can't get to sin fast enough.
You know what? Okay, so that happens too. Like, and I've always wondered this, and I don't think all of them, well, I don't know, so I'm not going to say, but how many times is he's like, don't tell anybody, but they all go tell everyone? And why? Like, is it different for everyone? Because that's something, I mean, I can personally look into it. I don't mind. I was just wondering if you knew.
It's just like the sin thing too. So when Jesus tells anybody with demons, go and tell nobody, he doesn't want his witness coming from the kingdom of darkness. He has 4 that testify to him, right? He has the Father, the Spirit, his works, and his resurrection. That all testifies to who he is. He doesn't want the witnesser's testimony, his eyewitness testimony. If you think of a courtroom, he's not calling up the demons to testify to who he is, because there's the demonic, and we would say, like, he got Satan to testify to him. No, he has the Father, the Spirit, the works, and the resurrection. So some of the places in like Matthew, when he's saying, shh, be quiet, the Jewish leadership are to persecute him. So he's just trying to be able to move around, like to not have the flogging crowds and get where he needs to be. But some of it is the witness. He doesn't want certain people to testify to him because he doesn't want it coming from the demonic.
Because there was somebody, who was it that was blind and he healed?
Yeah.
You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's coming up. I think it's 9.
Okay. I won't talk
or maybe
about
it's
it
in Matthew. I don't know. I might be lying to you guys. That one is oh, I just spaced. I was thinking about something that I heard really cool about the write. Remember, Dreamy, we were talking about the writing when Jesus bends down and starts writing about the adulterous woman, and what did he write? I found the passage that matches that.
Did you? What is
Yeah.
it?
It says that he'll write in the sand and they'll be blown away or something. And remember, he's sitting down and he's writing in the sand and they all leave because there's nobody to accuse her. Whoever amongst you is free of sin, cast the first stone, and they all have to leave.
Yep.
Isaiah something. No, Jeremiah 13 something.
I heard that. I heard that.
Mhm.
And then yeah, I'm not yeah,
I have a question regarding Josephus.
Yeah.
You stated Josephus did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah.
No, he was a Jew through and through. So he has great, like, he's one of the best historians of that time, next to Luke. Although I think the only one better than him is Luke. But Josephus' records are very historically accurate to ground layout, to timing, to, he's just so detailed. But he knew Jesus, like he confirms Jesus existed. He lived from here to here. He, had the Jerusalem on his back and Rome on his back. And he writes about Christ quite a bit, and not quite a bit, but he affirms him, but he was not a believer. I think he even states that he did not believe in it. He was not one of his followers, I think he says.
That's very interesting. My dad was always in Josephus.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. That's a bummer because he's some of his writing. He has this story, I think in I can't remember how his numbering goes, but I think it was like 6b or something. And he talks about before the destruction of Jerusalem. So when you're reading John, you'll see that John like is flashing back. He's obviously writing way past when it happened and he's writing back to it. And he'll actually even write back to things and he'll say, do you remember? But in the storyline, this thing hasn't happened yet. It happens up here. But he's talking to you, the reader, who he knows has already read the whole story. So he's like talking to other people that already know the whole story. So anyway, where was I going with that? No idea. That must have been a lie.
a liar, liar, pants on fire.
You're a liar. Why did you guys listen to me and then help me? I can't remember what I was going to say. Josephus. Oh, so so here in Bethesda, even the porticos, and he's writing probably in 80 or 90, I think they think. So he's writing and he's talking about after the destruction of the temple for this passage. So that's why the Christian missionary in 400 came and could see the pools and stuff, but the temple itself was down and destroyed. So anyway, it's kind of just neat history, but John writes to it too, that when he's writing, it's still, this like area is still around. And Josephus talks about that. So Josephus, in one of his passages, he talks about like 12 years before the destruction of the temple in 70, there was a man like a prophet type, and he just walked through the streets screaming destruction is on you, screaming it night and day for like 12 years, to the point where the Jewish leadership and the Romans tortured him to make him shut up, and he could not shut up. He just screamed that this destruction was coming, and then it was destroyed in 70. So that's one of his like really like kind of interesting stories in Josephus. I think this, I think what I noticed here is John and, well, Acts, John, Matthew, and so like Exodus, Matthew, John, and Acts talk a lot about the signs. Even like in Acts, it's the disciples having all these signs and wonders, miracle signs and wonders that they were able to produce. So if you're really into thinking on those kind of things, which is a fun study, sign and signs, tons of stuff in Matthew, John, Exodus, and Acts. And some of the stuff the disciples were doing after Pentecost is like really exciting.
Um uh never mind.
Oh my gosh, you guys. I forgot to tell you. I'm telling you, I'm like falling apart over here tonight. We might not post this one to YouTube. Actually, we'll post it. We'll be consistent with our debauchery. So Messiah's authority over Sabbath. You're going to see like John is Jesus claiming to be God in every way. So when you're dealing with Islamic apologetics, they just need to read John, because John is answering everything in the Old Testament where God said if God comes, God's going to do God things. And then John is God doing God things from referencing back. So when Jesus says, I am, my Father is working and I am also, he's clearly claiming to be God. 100%, because it's all referencing back to the Old Testament. So one of the things that we'll see in John is Jesus is taking power, right? He's conquering all these things. And one of the things he's conquering in this chapter is Sabbath. Like that's they're enraged that he healed on this day. And yet their anger, getting that mad and angry. No, that's okay. You can do that on the Sabbath, but you can't heal somebody on the Sabbath. And even later he says, is it right to heal on the Sabbath or to, what's the other thing? Anyway, they're just like, he's addressing them like, you're so mad about this day, but God made the Sabbath for man, not man for the Sabbath. So anyway, he's taking authority over the Sabbath. The Sabbath became a major observance in Pharisaic Judaism, especially after the temple had been destroyed in AD 70. Its importance was so elevated that it was personified as the bride of Israel and God's queen. Today, at a certain point, Friday night synagogue services, the doors open and the worshipers come in, the Sabbath, in the singing Leche Dodi Likrat Kolal Shabbat, a song whose title can be translated, Welcome, my beloved, let us greet Queen Sabbath. So that if that's not idolatry, it's serious idolatry. When the question was raised by why God created Israel, the answer was that God made Israel to honor the Sabbath. Therefore, Israel was made for the Sabbath. So they're not understanding the spiritual, that Jesus Christ is our Sabbath rest, and that we're not worshiping this day, we're worshiping the God, the only God. To the one commandment Moses gave, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Exodus 20, verse 8. The Pharisees added approximately 1,500 additional rules and regulations. They were burdening these people so badly. While the Messiah and the Pharisees debated over the authority of the Mishnah in general, the one special area of debate was the proper way to observe Sabbath. What does and what does not constitute Sabbath rest? Yeshua had 3 such conflicts in a row, which will be discussed in this next chapter. So I'm going to read just this one, John 1 through 9. The first conflict pertained to the healing of the paralytic on the Sabbath day. The healing itself is recorded here in John 5, 1 through 47. This section contains the second of Yochanan's 7 discourses, the discourse on the works of God, and the third of his 7 signs. Furthermore, it presents another example of the conflict between light and darkness. He was the lamp that burns and shines, and you were willing to rejoice for a season in his light. It says later on in John 5:35. Did we read that? Oh, no, because we only got to 17. Okay. The healing took place not on the Sabbath, but on a feast day. And Yeshua had got, no, I'm sorry. Did it? Oh, yeah, feast days. Okay. But it does say on the Sabbath, he answered him, and for this reason, the Jews were persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. I don't know why this says that. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I missed a word. The healing took place not only on a Sabbath, but on a feast day. So this is a double whammy. And Yeshua had gone up to Jerusalem. Generally, if a feast is mentioned but not specified name, it would be the Feast of Passover. In this case, then, the second Passover mentioned in Yeshua's public ministry. That was my guess, too. I was looking through the feast, and it kind of seemed like it would have been Passover, just because of the name of the location and what's going to happen there later. With all this mention of the sheep gate and stuff, right? And that was all Passover from Exodus. And then he's the lamb slain. Yeshua approached a man at the pool of Bethesda. It is significant to note that the procedure he used in this case. First, he sought the man out. that was important too with the Samaritan woman, right? We know that he went out of his way for her. Just map wise, just topographically, geographically, he went out of his way for her. The man did not come to him because he could not do so on his own, nor was he taken to Yeshua. He didn't know who he was talking to. It was Yeshua who sought the paralytic and purposely approached him. Second, the Messiah did not demand any faith on the part of the man. At that point in his public ministry, faith was not necessary for a miracle to be received because of the purpose of his miracles was to authenticate his messianic claims and to get people to believe. Third, there was no revelation of Yeshua's messiahship. Yeshua did not tell the man who he was, and so he was healed. He knew not who it was. John 5:13. The paralytic could not believe that Yeshua was the Messiah because he didn't even know who it was who had done these healings. After asking the man if he wanted to be healed, John 5:6, and receiving a positive answer, Yeshua said, "Arise, take up your bed and walk." And straight away the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked. The paralytic was healed immediately. However, when he took up his bed as Yeshua had ordered him, he violated the Pharisaic interpretation of the Sabbath commandment. Nothing could be carried from the public to the private domain or from a private to a public domain. That's not anything Yahweh said. That's what they had added, right? By obeying Yeshua and picking up his bed, the man violated Pharisaical law. I was reading another commentary and it said, Christ could have done this the day before. He could have done it the day after, right? This man was there 38 years. He wasn't going anywhere. He's choosing this fight for sure. In this, like we were talking about with the porticos, this is a huge audience. It's a feast day. They're bringing in that's where they're bringing in the sheep for the slaughter. This is enormous. And he wants eyes on this. And it seems like when we were talking just a minute ago about, sometimes he silences them. He's not doing that here. He's picking a fight with these guys. He's doing it on the Sabbath because he is God of the Sabbath. So the Jews said unto him that was cured, it is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed. In defense, the man responded that he was simply obeying the one who had healed him. When the religious leaders asked, "Who is this man who said, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" he could not answer them. He still did not know. Afterwards, Yeshua found the man again, this time at the temple, where he was perhaps thanking God for his healing and participating in the rituals of the feast. Yeshua said, "Behold, you are made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing befall you." This indicated the spiritual healing of the man. At that point, he discovered who Yeshua was, and he informed the others. I don't know if you could think of I don't think he's actually saying that he's forgiven his sin here because he's healed him, but this man is not faithful like it just says. There's no repentance here, and Christ isn't even qualifying it. He's not requiring it. So anyway, it seems like he's talking about a very spiritual condition too, because he's talking about the eternality of this. Go and sin no more. Jesus says,
Hey,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Really quick, sorry. Before
Jamie's
I lose
here.
my question. So on the Sabbath, right? Because it says in the commandments, it says keep it holy, right?
Yeah.
But isn't it the Pharisees that were like, well, you can't work on the Sabbath? Or how did they come to that? Does that make sense?
I think God gave instruction not to work on the Sabbath, to keep it holy. I think that's in
Okay.
Deuteronomy 16. But this, like, don't pick up stuff and go to domain and public domain, that they definitely added.
Okay. Because
I think even the mileage and stuff. I think it was, we can go read it, find out where the rules on the Sabbath are. I think it's Deuteronomy 16.
Well, because sorry.
Go for it.
No, because whenever Jesus publicly healed someone on the Sabbath, the Pharisees accused him of breaking the Sabbath law, which I know is Matthew 12, Mark 3:2, John 5:14, and John 9:14-6, right? So they're accusing him of breaking the law, so he isn't breaking the law. But
he's not breaking God's law, he's breaking their law.
Exactly.
Okay, so Exodus 20.
I get those mixed up Like, where did, I got to figure out where that came from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because even like Jesus even plays back in chapter, was it 3? And he's like, oh no, 1, right? And he's like, Nathaniel, there's no deceit found in you. That's not true, right? He was a liar. He was like, we know from other stories that he was. So Jesus is playing to that environment too. Jesus isn't lying for that. But no deceit found in you, because why was that? Do you guys remember? I can't remember. It's explained in that passage, and we went over it. But anyway, Jesus is not lying, but he's playing to what they think about themselves too. So no, let me read it, because Sabbath stuff was different than what they made it. The commandment of Yahweh. So Sabbath is Exodus 8-10. Okay, then God spoke all these words, saying, I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, which is crazy because they're back in slavery to Rome and to Judaism and all this legalism. I brought you out of slavery. You shall have no other God before me. They definitely made Sabbath, just the day, a God before him. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in the water underneath. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, Yahweh, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers on the children, on the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of Yahweh your God in vain, for Yahweh will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. That's really interesting, because look how many people take his name in vain. Like we started off this Bible study with that. So many people claim to be Christians, and that you cannot white knuckle this walk. You either have the indwelling of the Holy Spirit guiding you, instructing you, convicting you, sanctifying you, or you're taking the Lord's name in vain. And he says he will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Verse 9, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Verse 10, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of Yahweh your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or female slave or your cattle or your sojourner who is within your gates. For in the 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And then it goes on, but I actually think, let's go to 31. 31 has more rules. 14-17. Therefore you shall keep the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. For whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days work it may be done, but on the 7th day there is Sabbath of complete rest, holy to Yahweh. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall surely be put to death. So the sons of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to celebrate the Sabbath throughout their generation as an everlasting covenant. So that's kind of important. I think that's where we get in these conversations, like Messianic Jews still keep the Sabbath, and I think they should. I think we keep Sabbath also, but we do it, if you worship Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But if you're making Sabbath your God, like they were, where they were hurting people on Sabbath, where they were raging on Sabbath, that's all like against the rest of the commandments that they say they follow. So anyway, I'm not really sure where the rest of the instruction for Sabbath is. Let's go to Deuteronomy.
I found this, and it kind of explains it. So I went to Got Questions. I was like, I want answers real quick. So it's exactly like what you were saying. By Jesus's time, the religious leaders had added burdensome rules and traditions for the keeping of the Sabbath, and had elevated their own rules to the level of God's instructions. So it was so bad that Jesus's disciples picked and ate some heads of grain as they walked through the field, and the Pharisees accused them of breaking the Sabbath because they were supposedly harvesting and threshing. So yeah, like it's not what they were doing, but they were making it appear like he was breaking the laws. I get it now. Okay, that makes sense to me.
It's pretty intense because I think if I was just like for me sitting out here and just reading Exodus 20 and then here in Deuteronomy 2, Deuteronomy 5:12 through 14, it's kind of like a reiteration. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy as Yahweh your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. On the seventh day of Yahweh your God, in it you shall not do any work. Your son, your daughter, your female male slave, your ox, your donkey, any cattle, your sojourner who is with you, so that your male slaves and your female slaves may rest as you do. Anyway, it goes on to, and then like you shall die, right? And maybe that rule is just there in Exodus. Maybe it's not extended here to Deuteronomy. I don't know timelines like that. But I mean, I can see how you would take it pretty seriously. Like God's like, I'll kill you if you don't honor and keep it holy. But then David eats from the Holy of Holies and they work on the Sabbath. And think about what your pastor does on the Sabbath. Your pastor's up there, that's his day of work. That's his like, yeah, maybe he studied all week, but now he's presenting, and that's like, I mean, that's some work. So it definitely could never have meant doing godly things, right? And
Yeah.
Jesus even says, like, your animal goes and falls in the ditch, are you not going to pull them out? Are you, is it? And then he goes on later, I think it's in Mark and Matthew, he talks about like, is it evil to do what is good on the Sabbath? What does he say? Healing on the Sabbath and stuff. So it never could have meant what they made it mean with all the, that was,
because it said like, it's like Jesus kept God's law and he had done nothing to violate the true Sabbath, like what God has commanded. Okay, this makes sense now.
Exactly, right? He is healing on the Sabbath and he's working and he's like, they had a rule that you couldn't go, I think like 30 feet or something. I might be getting that wrong, but I'm sorry. It was like a 1/3 of a mile or something. You couldn't, like, they were really strict about in feet. You had to, one step over and you'd broken the Sabbath and stuff. But that was their law that they put on it. But just imagine going out of, I mean, wars don't stop on Sabbath and everybody's got city crime and all that kind of stuff. Even with Judas, they drag his body and they dump it outside the gate so that they can worship Passover and Sabbath and all that. And so they were willing to do work. It was definitely self-righteousness, but you do see, so even based on what Jesus did in this passage, he heals on the Sabbath and then he goes and meets him in the temple. So he's traveled a little bit, but it's all the same area. But here it says, what was that? Exodus 20. If you do this, you shall surely die.
So are you talking about you don't have to keep one day as the Sabbath because the Sabbath is like every day?
I think you can say that now. We were talking about like what does the Sabbath entail? Because we're in John 5 and they're giving the guy a hard time. He picked up his mat. But that thing that they said to him, that is definitely not a Yahweh commandment. That was something specific that they had added to the Sabbath. I was reading from Yeshua, Life of Messiah. So they're pulling from all like the Talmud and all that stuff, all the rabbinical stuff. So they actually have the list of 1,500 things that you couldn't do during this time. I mean, partially written down. I think there was like, I can't remember how many saw, at least 900. Some of it's destroyed in the destruction of the temple, but they had added so much to what it meant to keep the Sabbath holy. So that's what we were talking about. Like, what did God say about the Sabbath, and versus what did the Pharisees, what did they added?
Yeah, and you know what kills me is because now is Jesus is our Sabbath, right? What kills me is the Pharisee community is like, no, he's not our rest. Yes, he is. He is our Sabbath rest. Like if we're gonna keep, I'm not gonna go into that whole argument, but
it's the same thing.
It's their own word. What are you eating?
Don't call me out like that, girl.
It really
Um,
bothers me when people are like, the Sabbath is, you have to keep it on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, or
Just,
any one of them, you know.
yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Well,
Because
look at
like
Islam. Islam is Friday night. Sabbath for the Jews is Friday to Saturday. And then they persecute the Christians on Sunday. But in Acts, they're meeting on Sunday. Jesus rose
Right.
on Sunday. So, but then they're worshiping another time is Peter and Paul are going into the synagogues. So they're going in and worshiping. I think it was their transition. It's showing you their sensitivity. They still, like, life was around the temple, the feast and the Sabbath and the temple. And like, that was like your uncle was there and your cousin was there and your family and your animals. And like, that's where life was. It was like the water cooler. So I think it was really hard for them to give that up. Like traditionally, like just days of the week, what they were planning out, but they were definitely worshiping on Sunday. They were carrying out, Peter's up there preaching his thing for hours on Sunday. And so, I don't know. I've talked to a bunch of Messianic Jews that are real born again believers and they still keep Sabbath, but I think maybe they should because it says here to it. But also, I don't think they would have to. I think they can celebrate, Sabbath, rest, day of rest, worship on Sunday also. And it's not, they wouldn't be breaking this because Jesus is our Sabbath rest.
yeah, I agree with that. It's just, it used to confuse me because I was like, well, how is he not? But now that I understand that they're making up their own stuff, you know?
They're making up their own stuff. Yeah.
They
Okay,
added
so it
on
says,
to-
oh, sorry. Go for it.
Oh, no, you're fine. I almost fell. You're good.
Okay, this indicates the spiritual healing of the man. At this point, he discovered who Yeshua was, and he informed the others. There is no need to see anything sinister here. Although the response for the hearers is negative, the motivation of the former paralytic may have been nothing more than to give them the information they were seeking. I don't think I agree with that. I think he went back into false religion because of later activity. I think we're going to see a bunch of these people again in John 19. The incident led two specific accusations against Yeshua. The first accusation was that he had healed somebody on the Sabbath. This did not violate Messianic law, by the way, right? Like there's no law against healing on the Sabbath or healing in general. He healed someone. This did not violate, but it did break Pharisaical law, which forbade healing on the Sabbath. I wonder if there's really a law that they had written down, like don't feel better on the Sabbath. As long as a man's life was not in danger, he should not have been healed on this day. Yochanan stated this. That was the key reason why the religious leaders persecuted Yeshua. Rabbis were very specific about the healing that could or could not be done on the Sabbath. I guess you couldn't go to a doctor if you wanted to. Like if you wanted to, you weren't feeling good, you couldn't have gone to see like Luke, your physician. When Yeshua answered, "My Father works even until now, and I work," the second accusation came. He was claiming to be equality with God. This was so offensive to the audience that they sought the more to kill him. John 5:18. So, cultic groups often tend to base their denial of the deity of Yeshua on the assumption that the Son is less than the Father. Therefore, if Yeshua is the Son of God, he must be less than God. That was not how the Jewish audience understood it, though. According to their reckoning, the firstborn son is equal to the Father. So this verse, like many others, has to be viewed again with the backdrop of Jewish mindset of the day. What did the people think Yeshua meant when he heard him speak? When he said, "My Father works, I work," they clearly understood that he was claiming to be equal with God. Hence their strong reaction. There was no ambiguity in the Jewish mind. While it is true that many Jewish prayers, God is addressed as Father, it is always in the plural sense, our Father, and never in the singular sense, my Father. So they saw what he was doing. Let me go over here real fast. Let me get back over here. So in the early days of Jesus's public ministry, he healed the Jewish leper whose leprosy was fully developed. This is Luke 5:12. meaning the disease would soon take the leper's life. The fact that this leper was coming to Yeshua for healing would also have meant that he already believed in him. Mark 1:4 stated that this request, if you will, can you make me clean? He did not ask him, can you make me clean? In other words, he had no doubt Yeshua's ability. He believed that Yeshua would make him clean if he was so willing. He also did not say, if you will, you can heal me, but he said, you can make me clean. The issue is not healing, but this is a special disease unlike any other that has rendered this man permanently unclean. Indeed, it was his will. Mark revealed Yeshua's motivation to heal, being moved with compassion, it says in Mark 1:41. Luke described the method of healing, and he stretched out his hand and touched him. All three gospel writers took a note of the fact of Yeshua touched the leper, even though this was not necessary for the miracle to occur, as the account of the nobleman's son in John 46-50. We read that, right? He just said, go, your kid's gonna live. He didn't have to touch him. Yeshua could easily heal from afar. Why the emphasis on touching? It was an act of love, a mark of Yeshua's compassion, because this would have been the first time this man had been touched by human hands since having been declared a leper. Like, what a beautiful thing. Anyway, that was just, it was the offset to the man here, oh, Lori, spit it out. The royal official's son. He just did it from afar. It was really pointing to the man's faith too, that he had faith. You can. It also, they were mapping it for me on Yeshua, Life of Messiah, and where the man, it says he was from Capernaum, and then they were in Galilee. He could have made it to Capernaum. It seems like he had so much faith in Jesus, he just rested for the night, and then on his way back, they met him to say that his son was living. Let's do this one. Okay, this is the big topic about, so he has authority of the Sabbath. In the passage that we started with and with the healing Bethesda, the Messiah has authority to heal. This is the second of the 7 signs Yeshua performed that Yochanan recorded in the gospel. It is also Yeshua's second visit to Cana, the first being when he changed the water to wine. There was a certain nobleman whose son was sick. A nobleman was a king's officer, and by calling himself Yochanan showed that he was a government official of Herod Antipas. I think this is really cool because later on in Acts, later on in the epistles, Paul is writing to the officials in the, not the temple, but like Herod's house. So like, you think of the Obamas and stuff, and like they don't know Jesus, but God has his people in every realm of this. And you see like everybody's freaking out over the Super Bowl and stuff. I love listening to the testimonies of the Christian players that are on there, and they go and pronounce their Jesus. I get to play Thank You, Lord Jesus, my God and my King. And they're just like, they're so bold with their faith. And so anyway, Herod can hide out, the politicians and the movie stars and stuff can hide out, but there's Christians like all around them in their house, so to speak. And so anyway, he points that out because there's no place that is untouchable for God. He can get to every heart. So anyway, it's really important that it was noted that it was Herod Antipas's house. This man had faith. For from the distance of Capernaum to Cana was only about 20 miles and virtually uphill. Capernaum sits on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, about 600 feet below sea level, where Cana of Galilee sits about 1,500 feet above sea level. Upon arriving in Cana, the man besought him that he would come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. The phrase comes down geographically accurate since Capernaum is just discussed, sits lower in altitude than Cana of Galilee. Yeshua responded to him by saying, "Except ye see signs and wonders, ye will no wise believe." John 4:48. He challenged the nobleman's motives for seeking him out. Did he believe in him? Did he have faith, or did he just need convincing? Was he really just looking for a sign? The nobleman responded, "Sir, come down, or my child dies." He was not asking for a sign. He did not need to be convinced. He already believed that Yeshua was he who said he could, and then he claimed to be, and therefore he could cure the child. He was only asking that Yeshua would go with him and heal his son before he died, perhaps assuming that his presence was necessary for the child to be healed. Yeshua answered, "Go your child, go your way, your son lives." So compared to the Bethesda thing, no sin is mentioned right here, right? This child, there's no sin mentioned here. And actually, we don't know why this child is sick. So sometimes we come to the trial in life and like, why are we experiencing this? Is this sin related? Is this so God can be glorified? Is this for some kind of strengthening in us? The reasoning I don't think is really given right here. The man believed the word of Yeshua spoke unto him, and he went his way. The man had true faith, evident by the fact that he trusted in Yeshua's promise. As the nobleman headed back to Capernaum, his servants met him and informed him that his son lived. So he inquired of them the hour in which he began, and they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him." I think it was important. I couldn't find that much, but it's probably very important because when he meets the Samaritan woman, it's the 6th hour. And a chapter later, he's meeting the nobleman, and the son is healed at the 7th hour. But there wasn't actually that much on the 7th hour like there was on the 6th hour. So we're talking about 1 o'clock in the afternoon right here. That I shouldn't have said that like that. Jewish time, I think they're assuming Jewish time because it's Jesus, but this person of the house of Herod, the nobleman's son, he might have been a Gentile, and then it might have been like 7 a.m. because the Roman clock and the Jewish clock, the time, they're not spoken of the same. I think I was reading that they were talking in, like John would have been announcing in Jewish time. So this is about 1 o'clock that the son is healed. The key word is yesterday. It shows that the man stayed overnight in Cana. He did not rush home to see Yeshua said was true. Yeshua asked the man to believe in his words without evidence and the sign any personal appearance of the bedside of the sick child, and the dad did. He received his son back. As a result, not only, but his whole household. I think that's really just special, like here's all the Gentile missionaries going out. Yochanan concluded, "This is again the second sign that Yeshua did, having come out of come out of Yehuda into Galilee." Yochanan was not implying that this is the only second sign that Yeshua had done up to this point, since he had already mentioned many signs he had done in Jerusalem. Yochanan points out that this is the second sign that he had done in Cana. So anyway, that is what I have for today. I forgot I tagged up this book. I'm gonna start